Welcome, everybody. I would like to invite you to a beautiful day in Arkansas River, Colorado, USA. We are having a beautiful day with clear blue skies, and the birds are singing in the tree. And while we are drifting down, a loud roar starts to sound around the next corner. And you start to think, are we really prepared for the journey that we are about? Are we really prepared for the things that will come ahead of us when the speed of the river will start to flow? So things you will ask yourself is about how do we keep the boat in balance? How are we going to travel down this river as a team and taking those kind of trick decisions and at the exact right time to help us move forward in a safe, balanced, constructive way down the river. And what I'm actually talking about here is the day-to-day strategy execution, where not strategy execution is something you define and then you hope it will happen. No, I'm talking about strategy execution where you are part of the process. You are part of the process thinking about how are we going to protect the intended sustainable strategy and how it should be executed. How are we constant going to be able to create value creation and distribute that decision making into the right team, to the right place of the person on the team that should have the opportunity to take that decision? And also, how are we able to support those teams and those critical decision moments when we need to be there to support them with multifaceted, complex decision foundation that is needed to be at the right place to support that? And I would like to take you through this journey today. My name is Claes Sjödahl. Thank you for that introduction, Roman. I've been in the industry of business transformation for the last 25 years, and I've been using enterprise architecture as the best tool that I've found to be able to manage and support that kind of cross-domain, complex enterprise architecture kind of challenge. And it's based on that that I've been doing that type of business transformation. When we look around the world, we can see a lot the mega trends about the need for speed, the need for quicker reactions and reactions that quite sometimes it's outside of our comfort zone as the enterprise. We can see things like constant change, constant flow, and we know that the need for speed will not slow down. It will actually start to increase even more. And there is no way for us to stop the change. There is no way for us to say, please pause the change for a moment while we are getting things together and things sorted out. No, everyone who sees this and experiences this, they need to figure out how can we embrace and manage this constant change, constant flow of things that are moving around us. And all of this, then, the disruption of new challenges in finding the balance between the speed versus old traditional governance, and a nominated mandate and the ability to take accountability where accountability is needed to take, and those other elements of reporting versus transparency, management versus leadership, is putting a lot of the deep understood assumption of enterprise architecture, business architecture, and how it should be conducted from that kind of governance type of perspective. And we need to figure out how we should be able to manage and sort out and to be supportive in this type of setup. Because when we listen into the executive, this is a report from McKinsey, they are talking about that 70% of executives' time is spent on making decisions under time pressure and with too little or the wrong kind of data. And when you ask the executive what they think about this situation, you can see both the pains that they are experiencing in the pains of, well, I don't have the time to focus on strategy execution, or I don't realize the value that we are aiming for. We have limited funding to enable innovation, and there is so many risks, so I don't know where to mitigate and what to support in what sequence. And I'm actually also quite uncertain where we should focus to build that long-term flexibility that I know is needed. But at the same time, you can listen in to have an understanding if they had the opportunity, if they had the ability, they would like to build that kind of sense of empowerment and figuring out the control of sequence in what sequence things should happen. They will also like to have that kind of balance, the right balance between structure and value, where you prepare for the future while at the same time delivering value each day. They want to have that kind of openness and transparency within the enterprise that helps spark new ideas and opportunities, and things that could emerge as good design also are treated in an equal, open and value type setup. There's also the high level of predictions for flow and deliverables, where we know the things that we are prioritizing that are flowing into our change flow, our change execution, are actually there for a good purpose and they are able to be executed. And of course, they also would like to establish that kind of learning foundation structure that could that helps the organization, the method, the people within it to continuously strengthen the way that they operate and help to strengthen their position in the infinite game of continue to play successfully. And from a market perspective, the response have been distributed, and many times it's been distributed and empowered teams working in these kind of agile setup, agile models. And we are seeing different models emerging, all of them with similar type of pros and cons. The pros, the focus on the distributed empowerment and quick time to decisions, but also the problems about trying to identify cross-domain dependency, cross-domain leverage, and that kind of identify those shared foundation that could support multiple different areas. So now we see that the need for change is challenging those existing norms, and it puts an acute pressure on the way that we behave in our roles as enterprise architects, business architects, and how we are able to play and being supportive in that kind of governance structure, organization design, product methodology. Because what is emerging is that your governance doesn't work if you're outside your jurisdiction. You need to be at the position where the decision is being made. And also, but I think that is quite known for months, that the architecture doesn't work if it's not seen. Architecture doesn't work if it's not applicable. So the model of the method of the agile perspective get those kind of water stain all over them. They will be impacted on the ability to move quick, but also the ability to be able to have that kind of discipline that Daryl is talking about, to being able to manage this in a constructed, controlled manner. Because we hear things like, and for example, Gartner is telling us that 83% of the executives that are connected to this say that they have the hard and very difficult struggle to get some meaningful transformation out of their digital transformation journeys that they're aiming for. So there is this role of this critical central role helping with this type of coordination, this type of that is able to establish this big picture that are supporting multiple personas within the organization. And also, as I heard our previous talker speaking about, being able to establish that network of making those connections within the enterprise, to be able to collaborate both vertical and horizontal with multiple different stakeholders and partners of helping in this type of setup. So then this opportunity emerged from the enterprise architect, the business architect, to take this opportunity to with just enough data, being able to support this multifaceted, complex decision making. Be able to identify those areas where there are semi-autonomous areas, where there are domains that needs heavily more type of connections, but also identify foundations that are critical to keep the flow, to keep the constant flow. And the way to start to connect this together is to anchor this kind of ambition, ways of working on flows, both on our strategy and our objective framework about setting the right direction, figuring out why, when, and what capabilities need to change to be doing this kind of setup. But at the same time, keeping that eye on the change value streams, on how we are changing and doing our change execution. Those triggers should then be input to the decision triggers of the strategic content. How do we manage this from a governance and operation perspective? So we are ensuring that we are managing the controlled operations, but also how to manage and trigger that into our operational value streams of running the business and our commercial operations, and how we are bringing the value to our customers, our consumers. And then, of course, connecting this with the feedback loop of things and events and data that should be able to flow back to the decision triggers from the operational context and bringing them into the strategy and objectives and the way that we execute on our change value streams and change execution are being managed. So how do you do this? How do you do this practical? First of all, taking this role, but also being able to apply that value. Well, you need to be part of the boat. You need to be part and participating in the flow. You need to be part of that kind of intended execution. So you are able to manage and control and build that transparency on the execution that is ongoing, but also early on identify areas where you need to intervene or where you need to take this different type of alternative routes, explore options, managing these kind of expectation, not to stop the flow, but to manage the flow, to keep the flow going with perhaps alternative activities, or being able to support the things that was intended from the beginning. So this kind of strategy, ongoing strategy execution, which is not something you formulate, but you actively participate in, then you need to balance different things. And I would like to highlight, so if you look then at an organization today, what might that look like? Well, we have very skilled team players, we have very skilled persons working, but it's quite often you get this prioritization tug of war. Somebody asks for give me, another one just let me, and there's somebody holding on to this one. And it's quite easy to see in this picture that all of these three can't win. And there's very difficult actually someone will win in this. It looks like it's a fail or lose type of setup in this. So the importance of this is trying to bring these together, trying to bring this into a negotiation of what is the next best architectural activity to do? What is the next best thing to actually put in our pipeline to support our strategy execution? And to manage these different elements, I would like to look a bit deeper onto what are those three elements that I'm talking about. So these three different elements I'm talking about, it's the demand backlog, the way of working with continuous value proposition towards our customers and consumers, improvement, extensions, entirely new value proposition. In the middle and the blue area, we have the solution vitality, the quality and the health of the solution that are being used, and the balance of both intended and emerging design, and having the right mechanism to be able to do that. And also the element of execution capacity, figuring out what is the optimal value delivery design so the demand on top of the solution are able to be realized and put into the operational environment where both us and our customer can benefit from that. So, and of course, all of these different areas have their own area of expertise. Because when I look into this, demand backlog to the continuous value proposition. There are multiple different types of techniques and things that you could highlight, but what I would like to look into this one and highlight is the curious and innovation tryout mindset. There is so much that we don't know, so let your curiosity help you to manage the right path and where we actually should focus. If we don't know, try it out. Don't be afraid of your curiosity. Actually help use that as an energy for you to move in new, explorative, interesting areas. When it comes to the solution vitality perspective and connecting that to the balance of intended and emerging design, I would like to highlight the shared foundation continuous identification. So the shared foundation, like the shared services within the enterprise, it's important to figure out that within an enterprise, an organization, there are so many areas that have similar things that need to be solved, similar things that they need to be taken care of. So it's important to have those shared services and making them as attractive as possible. So you get that healthy pull if they actually are able to show their value and how they should be consumed and used within the organization. When it comes to the last one, the execution capacity, I would like to highlight the empowered autonomous team and how you should be able to support those autonomous team, because the autonomous doesn't come of its own, and quite often there is always a certain amount of semi-autonomous type of setup where there is so many different dependencies to different areas. So it's important to have that kind of healthy balance, healthy recheck, recontrol of things that should be part of the ownership of those different teams, things that should be removed or things that should be added, so you have that kind of continuous balance of what is the right setup of those autonomous team. But it's not the excellence that I would like to talk about on these three different value streams, these three different approaches of connecting these things. It's actually the power when you're bringing those together. How do you find the convergence between solution vitality, demand backlog, and the execution capacity? Because one of the key statements I would like to talk about is to build that area that is shaped for success as big as possible, to extend that. It can't, I would assume it's very difficult to get them all to overlap. Then there is no tension in this type of setup. But the ambition should be to build that area that is shaped for success as large as possible. Because if you're outside of that, then you're actually trying to push something into the strategy execution and your change execution pipeline for something that perhaps have zero or very low likelihood of success. And who would ever benefit from that when we are trying to push for something that 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 we know of will be a certain failure? But that is not the same thing to say that we shouldn't try out new things. We shouldn't push them in to the execution backlog where there is very limited way to manage that type of uncertainty. That should be done when the pipeline and the change is actually being shaped for execution. So if you don't think that you have a solution that might support what the demand and execution capacity is looking for, run that kind of technology spike to try out if there's some way that we can take this problem in front of us and bring that into a sustainable solution. If we have lack in execution capacity, think about alternative ways of educating your own resources, bringing other resources into play, thinking out external partners or collaborators that could help you with that type of execution capacity. And if you don't have the right mindset or the right understanding of your demand, try it out. Try it out together with your customer. Try a different version before you get into the way that this is actually the way that we should execute. So the uncertainty of these you could manage with different type of things. But it's important to get this area that are shaped for success as large as possible. Over the years, I've been seeing different type of these kind of elements and the balance pattern that they have emerged. I don't know if you recognize any of these type of patterns, Jerome. The first one is like the dysfunctional, where you can see there is a very little converged area between the different areas. So it seems like there are very little that they actually could act upon and still being successful. On the far right side, you can see the balanced organization where there is so much overlaying. So this organization, this change capacity within this organization have a very high level of agility, interbuilt flexibility, and are able to act on a lot of things that are able to generate value in the short time period. But I would assume that it's taken a lot of hard work to get into that place, both from the demand, solution, and execution type of setup. When we're looking at the analysis paralysis setup, there is too high focus on the perfect approach and fear of we need to get this right. We need to look at this one more time. We don't want to do execution. We need to figure out how this could be done in a slightly more perfect way. In the middle one, about the architectural depth generator, here is when demand and execution have a strong connectivity, but at the same time, you are building a depth that sooner or later will hit your ability to move, your ability to be flexible. You might be able to run this in a short time period, but that depth sooner or later needs to be paid in, in less agility to be able to act on the speed of change and the constant flow that we would like to support. And the last one that I'm calling continuous reprioritization, that is that type of organization where you have a lack of demand or it's not clear on how the demand should be articulated. So there is this constant reprioritization between how to build the solution, how to do the execution, but they're not able to tie it to any real structured demand. And therefore, they're having a hard time figuring out what are we doing next. And it's quite easy to often do that reprioritization with less value out of. You often see those kind of organizations are quite busy with building almost IT for IT. They're keeping themselves busy with that type of setup. So if we then are then starting to put this together and looking into this, how could we bridge these together? And remember what I'm talking about, my view on the agile industry and that kind of distributed power. Let's look at that at the constant flow of continuous change. It's a river that doesn't stop. Hopefully, with our ability and emergent things that we talked about before, when we are combining data and providing the right insight, we could be that kind of team role that helps with that kind of continuous guidance and the custodian of intent that we were building. And with that type of role and that type of mindset, I would like to share with you 4 different tactics or 4 different approach that I've been using when I've been working like the enterprise architect, business architect in this kind of agile safe setup. And in my perspective, I've been working with agile EA in the safe setup in the finance industry with 3 different banks in the Nordic region. So the first one that I would like to look into this kind of opportunity is the pursue clarification to protect intent. So to be able to reprioritize and have that kind of distributed learning, at the start and the beginning, look at the wide scope with very limited details to it. It's easier, it's more better to only focusing establish that wide view. So based on a conscious decision, you are able to, with your backlog, prioritize what area should be moved into the funnel, should be moved into the next step, and then you are doing the de-scope, what to focus, and at the same time, you are able to dig deeper on the detail level. All of this then is continuously helping you to push things. No, we need to wait for this. we need to reprioritize. You're able to have that kind of collaboration flows with multiple different stakeholders, multiple different architects that could help and benefit in this view to constantly evolving the architectural bill of material that we are moving into. So it's important to keep that high level view, high level perspective, and at the right time for the right focus, for the right purpose, taking that backlog decision to take it into more details. And that helps you to both be prepared of things that will be flowing down the river, but also being able to actively intervene and talk about things that is not really ready. We need a different type of enabler or shared service to manage that. I think we need to wait with this and move this smaller scope further, because then that has opportunity to be successful. The next thing I would like to highlight is the alignment with cycle and participate in event. Because many of these agile type of methods have quite strong methods, events, cycle that they would like to participate in. This one, as you perhaps can see, is very safe tuned with having that kind of mindset that in your architectural backlog, your back office that you're working with is have this kind of continuous ongoing understanding of large elements that are flowing down the river, things that change that are in shaping. How does this make sense in our domain mapping type of perspective? Do we need to connect to other domains? Do we need to connect to other architects? How is this fitting into the bigger picture? But also being able to find out those enablers, those shared services, those shared platform that is needed to support the execution and the implementation of the business value. And at the same time, have your eyes on the preset roadmap and its alignment. How are things connected based on this? Because based on that type of structure, then you are able to be part of the ceremony to select and prioritize things that should be changed, put into the backlog of change in analysis. Change in analysis then is the final step of doing that kind of the domain capability verification. And this is actually the capability in the safe terminology and not in the business capability version. And you will have things like vision and solution intent creation and enabler clarification and outline. So all of those question marks has been removed, so you're really able to keep the flow within the change implementation, but you're also keeping the flows of things that you believe are right for the strategy execution. Removing the blockers and select and push for the things that are shaped for success. The third area that I would like to say is to calibrate the size of change. So within your mindset, have a catalog of different approaches to use depending on the impact and the weight of the change that you have in front of you. I talked about that type of mindset, that we should only push things into the backlog that are ready for execution and ready for success. But you actually might be able to take elements of those change and push into the backlog, because you want to get as soon as possible, get the value into your operational engine. You want to get it proven, you want to get it validated, because it might be some of those things that you're establishing was actually serving the purpose. That was good enough for this year, for next year, and then you have a more steady thing to look into those things that need that type of wider, deeper analysis, and being able to establish those more widely things that has to happen. So in this example, within the running operation, if you're able to optimize something on the fly, it could be business rules, it could be a process flow, it could be some intervening of that. Use that. That's perfect, because that kind of tuning is value directly. It's value implemented directly. But otherwise, you should be able to use those different elements, those different size of execution, so you're able to balance things that are ready for success on a quick time perspective, and getting those validated and to see if that is actually fulfilling what is asked for, and at the same time being able to identify those large things that needs to be more thoroughly understood, deeply architectured, and need to be a wider concern for a bigger part of your organization. And the last thing that I would like to go into in this setup and a citizen, that is nurture the intended brand of the architecture and the architect. So continue to think about the brand and how the architecture function is perceived within the organization. One of the things that I've used as an example as instead of calling it architectural review board, call it solution intent forum or solution intent guidance. Established a mindset and a viewpoint that you are a service organization. You are a service function that are there to help, to guide, to navigate complex things. So, and these are steering principles that I've used in all of these kind of agile setup, being able to have that, have a share, a vision, to be able to have something to use from inspirational perspective, build bridges with different stakeholders, architects, teams, build those bridges and continuously iterate those values and those dialogues that is so important to have a shared view and a shared understanding. Do quite a lot of preparation if you have the opportunity to do that in your enterprise architecture back office, but wait and identify the right opportunity to influence that. Don't push change, don't drive change, because that is quite often a very time consuming, hard thing to explore. But if you're actually using those opportunities that are merging, use those as the engine for change drivers. And then of one of the things that the key speaker also talked about is that establish that wide community of learning, the collaboration of different types of architecture roles, different types of delivery roles, different types of business stakeholder, and having those part of understanding of the community of learning and how you are actually are improving the way you are managing strategy execution, because there is so many different elements that you need to change and drive improvement over time. So build that community of learning, because that will help you going forward. So if I then summarize this balance pattern that I've seen and just talk about a few highlights and a few tactics that I would have used. So if I was in the area of analysis paralysis, I would have used those kind of things of trying to infuse those kind of try out mindset. Focus on things that we could action upon, and let's try this and measure the success. Let's think about how could we do this and then measure if that makes sense, and trying to nourish that, nurtures that type of approach where we're actually able to, okay, yeah, we could try that out to see if that works, and trying to support that type of mindset. In the middle area about the architectural depth generator, I'm thinking about identify and focusing on those things that will be difficult to change, that will be hard to transform. So the not the zero regret, but there is actually quite a lot of regret if those are not managed. So building this, the putting extra attention to those, and also being able to show the reasoning why it's so important to establish these core structure in the right way, and then using that as the foundation to drive that as the extra consumption, as I told previously about the solution vitality, and making those shared foundation a key success. In the last one, I would focus a lot about continuous reprioritization. I would start to do those kind of share vision, show vision, about doing those kind of different demand hypotheses and trigger that kind of explorative way, and establishing that kind of deeper understanding within the demand structure and the solution and execute structure, and trying to bridge that gap. I would also try to visualize the demand to value stream change execution setup to see where are things that are blocking us, where are we spending time in this kind of constant reprioritization, and how is that hitting us as an organization, and the strange execution that we are looking for. Trying to summarize what I've speak so far. So as I said, there is so many things to learn. There are so many things to evolve in this type of setup, both in competence, method, culture, maturity. There might be new communication paths, new collaboration paths. You have to take, or it's strongly recommended, to take that kind of iterative learning approach. And don't be too hard on yourselves. Figuring out what you did really good and trying to enforce that, support that, and do this kind of iterative learning approach together with the business stakeholders that you would like to connect to, part of this, and the full community that are working with this type of strategy execution. Constantly learn, trying to improve, constantly learn on how to be part of that day-to-day strategy execution, because that will not happen by itself. So a few things to suggest what you could start with on Monday, trying to figure out your strategy execution balance within your organization. Where do we have good areas of synergy, and what is actually the convergence rate within our organization? Figuring out those type of area where you need to improve the balance. Do we need to do some work here to try to bring these areas as close as possible? And then at the same time, also identify those decisions that is needed to support that balance, but also being able to manage the constant flow of new things that we would like to keep delivering. And with those wrapping up words, I just wanted to nudge if you thought this was interesting. We have written a few other white papers about the 5 enterprise architecture trends that has been interwoven, a lot of the thinking that you have seen in this, and also the way of enabling the democratized decision making in the digital organization. And with those words, I would like to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today, and to sharing my thoughts and thinking, and Ardok's point of view on how to run this kind of strategy execution, where it needs to be something that is happening every day. And I ask if there is any questions of what I've shared today. I can't hear you, Roman. I think you need to go.
I think I got it now. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation and great way to frame some of the challenges we had. I did want to put up some comments just for you to take a look at. These aren't necessarily questions, but Lisa mentions that architects should be the twine between digital and digitizations, existing companies, brownfields, both from business enablement and technology reuse and net new roadmaps. Any thoughts on her comment here?
If I'm interpreting the question right, I'm thinking about the digital effort, and also at the same time being able to articulate things that could be reused, things that are already placed on that. And I fully agree that. I fully agree with it. So the part of that is, if you can identify something that could help you to bring value the next day, then that is a true win. Well, the next day in a perhaps a bit longer, but having that ability to figure out what is already there to use, what is already there to be leveraged from, that type of wording, that type of discussion, that is so important. And then of course you need to be able to mitigate that different areas within your organization might have different quality aspects and aspiration of what needs to be consumed, but at least you need to be that facilitator to navigate on where and how to reuse. I think that is a direct win. Yeah,
Excellent.
direct.
One of the slides you showed also resonated with me a little bit, the idea of not forcing change. And I think you specified it as finding opportunities.
Yeah.
A lot of the strategists, corporate strategists, will refer to things like inflection points that companies reach. How do you prepare for those opportunities or inflection points so that you're ready when they occur? Because usually you don't know until they're upon you, and then it's time to react.
Yeah. One of the tricky things of using in this kind of setup is quite often when you see this kind of agile movement, you start quite low in things that needs to be described, things that needs to be being pointed. So it is over a few years you're able to move yourself. So in a safe setup, you're able to move yourself up to a safe capability level and then all the way up to an epic level. Because when you're on an epic level, you are actually on a size that could drive direct strategic impact to the organization. And to just to be able to formulate that, to listen in. So if you say this from a strategic intent,
Mm-hmm.
and then you quite quickly can formulate that to epics that you at some point need to manage.
Okay.
I think the strength there is to formulate to show if we have this strategic intent, these things to be managed, we do not execute them now because we perhaps not have the maturity, we don't have the platform, we don't have the capacity, but we know them are formulated so at some point we need to action upon them.
Okay.
And that was one of just as one of the success thing that's quite interesting as well, because when you formulate those epics and you make those transparent,
Mm-hmm.
people can't stop think about them. So they prepare themselves for change before we actually push for it. So if we have like an epic saying we need to do a significant different customer analytics approach,
Mm-hmm.
the organization will think about how that could be managed even before we get to that point.